Welcome to the Quit by Healing podcast. This podcast is all about men's self-development and men's mental health. And the starting point for this is to overcome porn addiction, because porn addiction is probably the most common addiction in the world right now. And it is the bottleneck for a lot of men's true potential. In today's episode, I'm going to answer a question that was sent in to me. So let's start with that. Here is the message from a listener.
Hello, I have a question. Erectile dysfunction caused by porn addiction for a long time. Is it true that erectile dysfunction can be healed by quitting porn, adopting a healthy lifestyle, and also adopting healthy sources of dopamine? Can these habits cure erectile dysfunction caused by porn addiction?
So thank you very much for sending that in. This is the question I'm going to answer with all the information you need about this topic today. Now, before we get to that, a quick note. If you have a question like this, if there's anything you would like me to address in a future episode, check out the link in the description. There's a link in the description of this episode you can click, takes you to a page where you can subscribe to this podcast on various platforms. And there's also a message button. And you just tap on that message button and you can record and send a voice message just like the one you heard. Also note that I did not read out this listener's name, and that is stored the audio slightly so it's not recognizable. So when you send in a message like this, that's what I do in order to preserve everyone's privacy and anonymity. With that said, let's get to answering the question. The first thing we need to mention here is that porn-induced erectile dysfunction is a real thing. And it's quite common. In fact, it's probably a lot more common than we'd even guess, because most men will not readily admit to having this problem. But I mention that because it's important to realize that yes, pornography, the addiction to pornography can and often does cause erectile dysfunction. Knowing that, you might conclude that if the cause of the problem is pornography, then surely the solution is to quit porn. But unfortunately, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. It is actually possible that pornography causes your ED, but then even if you manage to become porn-free, you still have ED. And I want to address that. I'm not saying that that's always going to happen, okay? For some guys, you'll experience porn-induced erectile dysfunction, you quit porn, the erectile dysfunction goes away, done. That's it. And that's great, if that's you, good stuff. But I think it's very important that we dig into this and look at some of these details, because unless you know the things I'm about to tell you about here, you might find that you quit porn, you still have the ED, and then maybe that makes you relapse or you become hopeless or whatever. And we don't want that. So we are going to talk about solutions. And in order to understand the solutions, let's look at the causes in more detail. Let's start with pornography itself. How exactly does pornography cause erectile dysfunction? The simplest, shortest answer here is brain training. So when you are using pornography, you're practicing something, you're training your brain and body in a certain way. And basically, you're training yourself to become sexually aroused and to quote unquote perform sexually in a certain set of circumstances. Specifically, you're alone, you're watching stuff happening on a screen, you're not interacting with another human being, you are watching other people have sex, you're not having sex yourself. You are masturbating, you're stimulating yourself, it's not someone else doing it, and so on. Okay, all of these circumstances, this is how you're training your brain and your body to generate arousal, to be aroused. And all of these factors, like I said, you can think of this as training. This is what you're practicing. You're training your brain to get off on stuff happening on a screen. You're training to be aroused from self-stimulation when you are alone. And just like training in one sport can make you worse at another sport. So let's say you're a power lifter and you become big and strong and you pack on all this mass. Well, now you're probably a worse climber, right? So getting better at one thing can make you worse at another thing. And this is basically what's happening here as well. You are training your body and brain to respond to a certain set of circumstances. And now you're trying to have real sex with another person. You're suddenly in a completely different set of circumstances. And you've made yourself essentially a worse performer here. Basically, your brain and body are confused because all of a sudden, you're no longer alone. You're no longer looking at stimulating stuff on a screen. There's another person here that you're interacting with. It's someone else touching you instead of you touching you. all of this stuff is different, and then the arousal response is not what you expect, right? You've trained your brain and your body for a completely different set of circumstances. That is one way in which porn causes erectile dysfunction. Another factor here is overstimulation and desensitization. So when you're using porn, you're getting used to a really high level of like rapid stimulation, right? You're seeing lots and lots of different girls doing all kinds of stuff. And in any moment, you can always switch to the next, even more stimulating thing. Maybe you're even switching back and forth between multiple tabs with stuff going on, right? And compare that to having real sex with one person. Here's one person, even if this woman is gorgeous, she's naked, right? That's sexually stimulating, but it's just not the same level of, it's not the same kind of stimulation, but it's also not the same level of like rapidly changing stimulation that you're used to. It's maybe like the comparison between, scrolling through TikTok versus reading a book. Even if the book is a great book, it's very enjoyable to read a good book. If you train your brain to have this constant stimulation from a TikTok feed, eventually you find that you can't pay attention to a book anymore. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the book. It's just that you have trained your brain for a certain kind of thing. And there's also other factors that we can go into in future episodes, but for now, that is basically how porn causes erectile dysfunction. But the way the question was asked is actually very clever, because he also included quitting porn plus improving your lifestyle factors. And that's really important because, okay, if you just quit porn, that might not solve your erectile dysfunction issues, because lifestyle can contribute to erectile dysfunction issues. This is important in two different ways. The first is that if you have a really bad lifestyle, so if you have a really unhealthy diet, you're super stressed, you're sleep deprived, you drink alcohol too much, all of these things can also cause erectile dysfunction completely independently of the porn issue. So there, if you have a generally unhealthy lifestyle, even if you remove porn, other lifestyle factors might still be the cause of erectile dysfunction. But the listener who sent in this question included this very cleverly, because that is part of the solution for sure. Become porn free, but also clean up your lifestyle, build healthy habits, and so on. The second way in which this is important is that improving your lifestyle is an important aspect of quitting porn. So if you don't change your lifestyle, if you don't build good, healthy habits, it's just much harder to quit porn. And this is why with the Quit by Healing method, if you've seen any of my other content, this is something I frequently talk about. This is an important part of the solution. Building those healthy habits, changing your lifestyle, that's all part of becoming porn free in the first place. But even if you do that, you could still be stuck with erectile dysfunction. And that's because of the third factor, the psychological factor. So this is where it gets tricky, because you can have erectile dysfunction purely because of psychological factors. So for example, if you have really low self-esteem, maybe you feel really uncomfortable with your body, you don't like how you look, you feel totally unattractive, and now you're in a situation where you're trying to have sex with someone, but you're so worried about, oh my God, I bet I look ugly, you have no confidence at all, you start to worry. Well, under those circumstances, you're probably not going to get very aroused, and you will probably have trouble getting an erection. And as soon as you notice that you're either not getting an erection or you're losing your erection, you now start to worry about that, right? Because you're like, oh my God, I'm disappointing her. She's going to think I'm such a loser or whatever. You're going to feel bad about it. And then you'll psych yourself out even more. And the more you worry, the more you think about it, the worse it gets. And this is a vicious cycle, because next time you try to have sex, you remember that last time you didn't get hard or you lost your erection, and then you worry about it and you're like, oh my God, what if it happens again now? And the more you worry about it, the more likely it is to happen again. And this is where it becomes important for porn addicts. So what can happen is that even though you were perfectly healthy and your lifestyle was fine, but you started using porn, and then the porn factors that I talked about before make it so that you lose your erection when you try to have sex. Now you worry about it. You feel bad about it, right? You probably feel like a loser. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying you should feel like a loser because you lost your erection, right? Obviously, ideally, you'd just be like, hey, it happens. It's fine. It's okay. I can figure out what the problem is. I can solve this. And also, not getting a boner doesn't make me less of a man. Of course, all of that is true. But let's be honest. The way you actually feel when this happens is you don't feel good. So this experience of losing your erection, of having erectile dysfunction, even if it was originally caused by porn, can start the vicious cycle where next time you're worried about losing your erection again. That's why you lose your erection. And then next time you worry about it even more. And even if you then become porn free, you could still end up, even though the original cause was porn, okay, the original cause of your ED was porn, but you can get into a situation where you still have ED even though you're porn free and even though your lifestyle is fine, because you're so worried about losing your erection because in the past you've lost your erection. In other words, you entered the vicious cycle because you were addicted to porn or because you overused porn, but now you're stuck in the vicious cycle because of psychological reasons, and even if you remove porn, that doesn't get you out. And this, let me just insert here, unfortunately, I have personal experience with this. So in my case, this was actually very early on in my sexual history, if you will. The first few times I had sex, I had erectile dysfunction problems. Only later did I find out that the reason was the condoms I was using. Once I switched to a different condom brand, I didn't have this problem anymore. But by then, I had already had several experiences where basically the moment I tried to put on the condom, I really struggled. I lost my erection, and then of course I felt bad about that and so on. Because I'd already had that experience several times, even though now I had eliminated the original cause of the problem, which was the wrong type of condom, I still kept having this issue because I was so worried about repeating the past experience. So I also got stuck in the psychologically caused erectile dysfunction vicious cycle, and I had to get myself out of it by essentially solving this on a psychological level. So let's talk about that. I guess in this case, it's also fortunate that I've had this experience because I know what it's like to have this problem. I also know what it's like to get out. I know how to solve this problem. So let's talk about that. If you are stuck in the vicious cycle of losing your boner because you're so worried about losing your boner, what do we do about that? There are two things that help me the most with this that I'd recommend you do. The first is to learn to connect with your body, with physical sensations, and with the present moment. Because as I'm sure you know, what happens is that you start to worry and you get stuck in your head. And the more you worry about it, the more you're thinking, the worse it gets. Now, the solution to this is, unfortunately, you can't tell yourself to stop thinking. Right? If you try to tell yourself stop thinking or stop worrying, it doesn't help at all. In fact, it probably makes you think and worry even more. So what is the solution? Well, the solution is to connect with your body and with the present moment. Essentially, you can't get out of your head by trying to think about not thinking or trying to tell yourself to think less. The way to get out of your head is you have to shift your focus elsewhere. So the first thing to do here is to breathe deeply and slowly and focus on the physical sensations in your body. Essentially feel, what am I feeling right now? Physically, on my skin, how is my body feeling? What is it like to be physically present here and now in this moment? Now, if this is something you struggle with, you can practice this, and you can practice this outside of sex. So you can do this like a meditation. You can sit down and start paying attention to the physical sensation of just being you, of just existing in this room right now. And what helps often is to do essentially a body scan where you, instead of paying attention to your entire body all at once, you start body part by body part. So you might start at the bottom of your feet. What am I feeling at the bottom of my feet right now? And then you slowly move outwards. Okay, how are my ankles feeling? You just move your attention up your body, and you can even do left and right individually. So you just learn to feel into your body parts. And if you practice that a couple of times, you'll get better at it. You'll get better at just paying attention to what does my body feel like right now. It's like a tuning in. So like I said before, right, you can only get out of your head by essentially getting into something else. And you have to learn how to shift your attention, your focus from stuff happening in your head to physical sensations in your body. And this also works in the moment. So when you're having sex and you start to notice that you're losing your boner, or you start to notice that you're starting to worry about it, you're starting to get stuck in your head, this is how you can come back into the present. Feel the sensations in your physical body in that moment. And what you can then also do is start paying attention to your partner and take in your partner through all of your senses and really just pay attention to what's here and now right in front of you. So, touch and smell and see and just sense your partner. Paying attention to your senses like that is what brings you back to the present and what takes you out of your head. And this can work wonders. However, as you're hearing me talk about this, maybe you're wondering, I'm actually not sure, how do you do that while having sex? This only works, it depends on what kind of sex you're having, basically. Because if you're having the kind of sex where you feel like you have to perform, it's very performance focused, and it's like in your head, you're thinking, I have to make her come as quickly as possible or something like that, then all of this coming into the present moment is not really compatible with that kind of having sex. So that brings me to the second point. When it comes to how to have sex, the most important thing you can do is learn how to tease. So there's an important idea here, which is, as an analogy, think of it like this. If you want to have a really excellent meal, make sure that you're first really hungry. Because yes, of course, you can learn how to cook better food, and that's great, and I encourage that, become a better cook. But there's nothing that makes food taste great like actual hunger. So, okay, how does this apply to sex, and what does this have to do with the psychological issue of erectile dysfunction? We'll get to that. Let me unpack this. You'll see how this is a really essential key solution to this problem. Learn how to tease. What do I mean by that? So like with the food analogy, right? Food tastes better when you want it more. Because think about it, if you're stuffed with food, then even the most delicious thing, you don't want it. In fact, at some point, it makes you feel nauseous, right? So that's the one extreme. If you're too full, if there's not enough wanting of food, then no kind of food is appealing. On the other side, if you're really hungry, then almost anything becomes a delicious meal. And if you're starvingly hungry, you'll eat almost anything. Okay, so the more wanting there is, the greater the joy of getting the thing. And that's essentially the idea of teasing or delaying gratification. Like I mentioned before, a lot of guys make the mistake of having sex in a way where they're rushing towards the finish line, where to start having sex, you start with foreplay, and you have foreplay until she's ready to have sex. And as soon as she signals that she's ready for sex, that's it. You go straight for it. And then your focus is, okay, now I have to make her come. And ideally, she achieves orgasm before me. And otherwise, I didn't do my job well or something. So this is the kind of race to the finish line, performance-focused sex. And here, of course, you have to maintain your boner. And hey, if it takes her a long time to orgasm, then you better stay hard for a really long time. That is a performance-focused and finish line-focused way of having sex. And it is an absolutely terrible way to have sex if you worry about or struggle with erectile dysfunction. So instead, focus on learning how to tease and focus more on the pleasure than the end result. And teasing basically means that you make your partner want something, and then you withdraw, playfully you pull back before giving it to her. And this denial, the playful denial of something that she wants, makes the desire increase, all right? So again, if we go back to the analogy, it's not a perfect analogy, but you make her want something, you withdraw it, it makes her hungrier, it makes her want it more. And the more she wants it, the more delightful it will be when she finally gets it. This is what teasing is all about. You build desire. And instead of immediately jumping on the opportunity, so as soon as she wants something, you give it to her, you pull back and you feel the sexual tension, and you learn to enjoy that. You learn to enjoy the rising desire, the wanting it more and more. And this goes both ways. This goes for you and for her. So even for yourself, make yourself want her, make yourself feel desire and arousal, and don't gratify yourself immediately. Pull back, delay that gratification, and enjoy the sensations of the desire rising. Now, what this means is that it makes the whole thing more pleasurable, and you're experiencing more pleasure before you're having sex, in the sense of before penetration starts, right? You can feel a lot of desire, and you can have a lot of sexual play, and it can be very pleasurable and very exciting before the clothes even come off. Now, this is important for several reasons. One, realize that for most women, it's much more important to them how much pleasure they felt and how much of a connection with you that they felt than who had how many orgasms. And I'm not saying that orgasms aren't important. I'm just saying that don't be so focused on orgasm. Don't be so focused on this finale that you rush through what could be a long and pleasurable period of play, but you just kind of rush through it so that you achieve orgasm and you're done, right? For most women, they would actually prefer to have more drawn out sex, more playful, more teasing. And even if she doesn't orgasm, if she feels like this was a lot of fun, this was really exciting, and I connected with you, she would probably describe that as better sex than, yeah, the guy got on top of me and 5 minutes later I had an orgasm. And I'm saying this because I think as a guy, this is important to realize because it takes the pressure off. You don't have to rush to a finish line. And by teasing her, by learning how to tease, by learning how to play this game, you gain confidence because you realize that you can give her and yourself lots and lots of pleasure. You can create this really pleasurable experience. And it's not that important anymore. When did you get hard? How long did you stay hard? All this kind of stuff becomes less important. And this whole thing also applies to you because by teasing her, you're also teasing yourself. You are starting to play that game with each other. And here's where it ties in with this psychological issue of ED. Basically, the best way to overcome this is to give yourself a track record of not having the problem, okay? Because if the last 5 times you tried to have sex, you had an erectile dysfunction problem, then of course your confidence is going to be low and you're going to worry about it. But if you have sex once successfully where you don't have this problem, then that makes you a bit more confident. So next time you'll be a bit less worried, which means the chances are that once again, ED won't be a problem. And then now you've had 2 instances of sex without this problem. And the more of these instances you have, at some point you look back and it's like, okay, the last dozen times I remember having sex, it was great. I didn't have any boner problems. At that point, the psychological problem basically disappears, right? You're no longer freaking yourself out because you don't expect something to go wrong anymore. And how do you get there? Well, one of the best ways to do it is to build up desire before you have sex. The more desire you build up in her and in you, the more likely it is that you'll have explosively passionate, wonderful sex that is basically, you can make yourself so aroused, you can make yourself want it so much before the pants come off, that by the time the pants come off, you'll be so passionate, you'll be so into it that it doesn't even occur to you to start worrying about anything. And that's basically the goal. So this is why I say one of the most important things you can do is learn how to tease, learn how to delay gratification. Because initially, right, if you're in that situation right now, where the last several times you tried to have sex, you had this ED problem. So you're freaking out about it, you're worried about it. Well, the best thing you can do is learn how to tease and delay the next time you have sex, even delay it by several days or more, where you play with each other erotically, you turn each other on, but you're constantly backing off so that by the time, several days later, by the time you actually have sex, you're both like just jumping each other because you have so much desire built up. So that's what I recommend you do. That is what has worked for me. And, apart from solving the ED problem, this also makes for much better sex for both of you. So I highly recommend you try this. And I hope it works for you as well as it did for me, or even better. Now, if you try this out and you have an experience with it, let me know. I'd love to hear back from the person who sent this in, as well as anyone else who's listening to this and is going to try this out. So there you go. That is my solution to porn-induced erectile dysfunction. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please leave it a like on YouTube, leave a positive rating on your podcast app. Give the algorithms some kind of a signal because, as you know, the world is run by algorithms these days. And if we don't give them the likes and engagements and so on, they don't show this content to anyone, even though there are millions of men out there who could use it, who need it, and who could benefit from it. So your help in spreading the word is much appreciated. Check out the links in the description of the podcast episode to join my Discord community to learn more about how you can learn the Quit by Healing method for overcoming porn addiction, and of course, to leave your own voice message if that's what you'd like to do.